What's going on, guys? So our dreams are finally coming true. No longer are they going to have to buy data from multiple parties. It looks like US spy agencies are getting what we've all been waiting for. A one-stop shop to store and buy our most sensitive personal data. I know this is what I've been waiting for the last few decades. This is what I voted for. This is what I pay taxes for. This kind of funding, it's amazing to see all of our tax dollars go into this bloated defense budget. And to continue on, they essentially put a document out to solve a problem. The intelligence community has a commercial data acquisition duplication problem and a costly commercial data replication and storage problem. They certainly are smooth with the wording, aren't they? Is this just a requirement to jumble a sentence together like that? Someone in the government, leave a comment, let me know. Is this some kind of legalese, I guess? Anyways, let's get to the story. So this story is basically the translation of that, is that they have a data acquisition duplication problem, meaning they buy it from data broker A, data broker B, data broker C, but they might get similar data in A, B, and C. Then they also call it a costly commercial data replication and storage problem because there's multiple sets with same data. Maybe they may have to use additional petabytes or whatever amount of terabytes that they're measuring it by. And so they're reaching out to small businesses, non-traditional defense contractors. That's very inclusive of them, and traditional defense contractors. So as we know, the military budget got bloated up to $1 trillion in this latest bill, and they've cut all of the safety nets and things that our elderly family members depend on. So it's basically a wealth transfer to the Defense Department. And of course, as we know, over around 50%, give or take, of our defense budget actually goes directly to these military contractors. Reminds me a lot of the quote from Julian Assange, where he said that these wars, they're not meant to end. They're meant to be continually expanded in order to siphon out the money from the U.S. tax base to these contractor hands. And this has been much the same since 9/11 happened. It all seemed to coincide with that major event in history. That is when it really took off. Obviously, other people have warned about the military-industrial complex well before that. But continuing on, let's look into this article and take a look at what kind of data they want to store on us. So this data portal will include information deemed by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence as highly sensitive. This is data that can be, quote, misused to cause substantial harm, embarrassment, and inconvenience to U.S. persons. Essentially what they're saying is if this data or this portal that they're creating a centralized silo of all of our most personal data, if this portal was accessed or they gave access to someone who had malicious intent, they could actually use it for blackmail purposes. That's basically what that sentence means. Not saying that's the intent at all, as obviously it's for investigations and different intelligence operations. So it's not the intent, but the fact of the matter is this is data all in one place that could be used to blackmail people. And so this just reminds us that it's not always censorship that's the big problem. It's self-censorship. And that is exactly what mass surveillance causes, is self-censorship. Self-censorship being that this type of surveillance, this type of centralized data access, not only that, they're talking about using an AI crystal ball to fully integrate. And when you have these kinds of threats, you actually tend to create self-censorship. So while you may have free speech, do you really have free speech if you feel intimidated out of speaking your mind? If you are scared to speak out for what you know is right because of the massive amount of power that they have been consolidating, this really does look like Skynet's database. That's what I'm going to call this video, Skynet's database, because it actually looks like the pathway that you would go if you wanted to create a horrific hellscape dystopian war zone you would create a Skynet database, a centralized, all people's personal information, all in one single location, accessible to people. And the good news is they're protecting privacy. The privacy that they're protecting, according to this article, is just the privacy of those who are searching these Americans' most personal, sensitive information. And who knows what other parties. It may just say U.S. persons because of the civil liberties warning in this article, but the reality is it likely will hold information on various parties of all different kinds, and they want to use an AI crystal ball. What does that make you think of? What does that remind you of? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the seeing stone, the Palantir stone, which, interestingly enough, DOGE is building a master database for surveillance to track immigrants. You might say, well, what do I care? This is a database to surveil and track immigrants. But have you noticed that the very things that they said were just to surveil and track terrorists have now been expanded into actually feeding police information from fusion centers? So the very systems that they claim are just going to affect a small group of disenfranchised or less aspiring people, at least according to what the public believes. For instance, back in World War II, we heard from a priest, and he has a very, very popular quote. It talks about, first they came for this group, and I didn't defend them because I was not one of them. Then they came for that group, and then I didn't defend them because I wasn't one of them. And eventually, they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me. And that is the case in these types of systems. When they are building a Skynet-like database, at least what it sounds like, if they will not go after the general population first. If this were a ultimate plan to expand this, and businesses don't tend to shrink, they tend to want to expand. Can you remember how many times a surveillance business from 9/11 actually closed down and said, we don't have enough terrorists? No, what they do is they market themselves to the police. They market themselves to foreign militaries. And now Palantir is getting their foothold in Europe. So if you're not in the US, you should still pay attention to this story, because what happens in one country tends to spread to another, especially when we're talking about international business interests. So we know that in Argentina, for instance, they elected Malay. Now, Malay had a very similar theatrics on stage as Elon performed for Trump's administration. And this was with the whole chainsaw thing, cutting bloat, as they say. And what turned out to be was DOGE was cutting federal employees. Very good jobs with benefits. And they were cutting them, and they were replacing them with artificial intelligence where possible. Well, now DOGE is also working for the surveillance state, it sounds like, because they are building a master database to surveil and track immigrants. And as I mentioned, this starts with one group that you might not be willing to defend. And the thing is, we have to look ahead of this. Is this going to just go away one day? No. It's going to be expanded. This kind of infrastructure that's being built, this Skynet-sounding infrastructure, it's going to be expanded to the population. You mark my words, you can save this video, check back in 5 years, see if I'm not right. It's just the way it goes. Just like when they take away people's right, Second Amendment right, that many people are fond of, they didn't start with the general population. What they did was they started taking it away from people who were disenfranchised, people who have criminal records, for instance. Most people didn't defend those people when they lost their right. And the reality is, it says in the Second Amendment, shall not be infringed. What does that mean? That means for everyone. And Thomas Jefferson even said, no free man shall be refused the right to bear arms. So what are they, slaves? I mean, it just adds up in a certain way. So it always comes down to going after the people that many people will not defend. And then they can expand it. Once you get the infrastructure in place, you can expand it to other groups. And that's what I expect to happen. Just a prediction. So we can see that DOGE is building this master database for the Department of Homeland Security to track and surveil undocumented immigrants. I wonder how far this is going to go. Is it just going to be around the border, or is it going to be across the country? Because if it's across the country, well, the systems are already being put in place to track everyone. And all they have to do is plug in the data, which, according to this, they are getting very sensitive data. A DHS employee, Department of Homeland Security official themselves, tells Wired they are trying to amass a huge amount of data. Quote, it has nothing to do with finding waste or fraud spending. That's exactly right. I mean, don't be fooled by this whole thing. This is just silly. You know, you can look up the facts for yourself and you can see they didn't actually save the money they said they were saving. And they're building mass surveillance systems. So I've also been getting pushback. Some people have been leaving me messages saying I shouldn't be covering this, that it is political, and that they'd rather see other stuff. Well, I understand your point of view, and you probably support a lot of this stuff. At least you think you do, but I don't think you actually support what's really happening. If you really look deep into it, I don't think you would support it. I don't think most people would support this unless you're a billionaire getting the contract. So I'm going to continue covering tech stories as well, and I think these are monumental stories because they are historical. These are changes, major changes. So they basically want to... The efforts to support the crackdown appear to be far broader. Among other things, it seems to involve centralizing immigrant-related data from across the government to surveil, geolocate, and track immigrants in near time. They also have all kinds of satellites that can actually rewind the video to actually see what you were doing at what time and what place. So this stuff is in place. The sensors, they're built into everything now. And, of course, they didn't immediately respond to comment on this. The fact of the matter is, if you allow them to build this infrastructure, if you are okay with it, if you don't say anything, well, eventually you're going to find that this stuff is going to be used to actually track you as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was part of the same damn project, to be honest with you. I would not be surprised. I mean, take a look at the history. So we have DOGE, we have Elon. We know that Elon and the head of Palantir started PayPal together. They started PayPal together. And so is it really a surprise that they're hiring Palantir employees? So what they're doing is they're actually putting all of this DOGE stuff in the Palantir foundry. So that is actually what they're doing. This is all going to be stored at Palantir. You really think they're two different things? I don't. I personally wouldn't be surprised if DOGE wasn't just a giant defense project. That's my personal take on it. Based on everything I've learned, it certainly seems like some kind of a secret defense project, really, because they continue to just stampede over anything in their way, and nobody dares to get in their way. To me, it says they are working in defense. That is just the only thing that does this kind of... There's no pushback whatsoever on these kinds of systems. There's really, the politicians on both parties seem to be falling right in line. At least they're not doing very much. And Elon and Palantir head, they started businesses together. You really think they're not that close? They also are hiring people from Palantir. They are hiring people from Palantir. The DOGE staff makes up Palantir staff. Just add it up. It's very simple math. Very simple math. They're all working together. And now they're building this major centralized database to track and collect it all. Much like the old DARPA motto. The access to everything. Total information awareness. These are projects that have been released in Freedom of Information Act requests. And of course, we know a little bit about Peter Thiel and his friend Curtis Yarvin and his other friend Elon. Now, Elon plays a role of the the entertainer for the public. He is kind of just telling people, kind of getting on their good side. He's got all the data in Twitter or X. Of course, it's a perfect plan, really, if there were a plan, if there were a plan, it's a perfect plan, because you buy the biggest platform for social media. You have people projecting their thoughts instantly at all times. You're able to integrate all kinds of bots to train AI in there. And then you're also able to read the communications of every single person on the platform in order to determine how to best proceed from an AI stance and how to continue to mold the minds of Americans and the world, because that is great power. Now, Peter Thiel had said, "I no longer believe freedom and democracy are compatible." He wrote this in a, quote, manifesto. I don't know if he called it a manifesto, but that is what they call it in this article, at the Libertarian Cato Institute. So he no longer believes that freedom and democracy are compatible. He no longer believes freedom and democracy are compatible. Look, I know the U.S. is a republic, but there is representation. And when I talk about democracy, he no longer thinks democracy. He no longer thinks people should have a voice. He no longer thinks they should have representation. According to that quote, at least, that's how I read it. Now, he may have a different interpretation, and I would love to hear that, and I would be happy to make a correction. But from what I can read, he doesn't believe freedom and democracy are compatible. Well, you know what I don't believe's compatible? I don't believe certain things are compatible either. I don't believe that dictators are compatible with the U.S. Constitution. I think that's pretty clear in it. And there's many things that have been said by the founders about how to proceed when dictators try to come to power. There's a lot of things that have been said out there that people can do their reading on. I don't believe that dictatorship is compatible with the U.S. Constitution. So this is what I think. I don't believe, and I am not over my dictator phobia. I'm not over it. I'm definitely not over my dictator phobia. Why the hell would I want a technocratic dictator to begin with? So we see all of this, the Palantir, the secretive tech company rising in the Trump era, hiring Palantir employees in DOGE to create these master databases to surveil and track immigrants. Then you hear about this AI crystal ball, which sounds a hell of a lot like Palantir, which pretty much runs all of this type of stuff. So yeah, it sounds like it's all together. This is one big operation to coat the USA in a Skynet-like database and program. Now, even a prominent Silicon Valley investor, Paul Graham, has accused Palantir of, quote, building the infrastructure of the police state, end quote. Sounds a hell of a lot like reality to me. A secretive company that is rising. This guy's diabolical, if you ask me. He is just, I observe a lot in people. And I see, obviously they're using it in the IDF and Gaza to target people and do different things. But it's also coming home. So don't feel so safe that you're from afar. They are building this centralized database now. They're going to have everything. It's going to be everything. And I'm still not over my dictator phobia. I hope others are not over their dictator phobia as well. Now, one thing is Peter Thiel had said that he thinks his efforts in technologies create a new place for freedom. So a new space for freedom. And he's talked similar, and if you look at my video on freedom cities, you can kind of get an idea what he might mean here. And so he basically wants to create a world that is safe for capitalism. Capitalism at all costs. But is it really truly capitalism? Is it really free trade at that point? So we also know that some of the data that they are likely to incorporate in that centralized database includes stuff that came out by Notice, which is something called weathered security. It vacuums up Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Make sure to check out my previous video on little hardware pieces that you can buy to help protect you from Bluetooth wireless tracking, things like that. We talk about solutions on this channel as well. So Weathered Securities podcast boasts that it can track other signal emissions from key fobs, satellite receivers, low-powered radio chips, and modern credit cards. Think about that. Do you carry your credit card in a wallet that does not have a mesh pocket, that is not a Faraday wallet? You better think about that, because they can, in fact, track that. In fact, if you even have an Android phone, an NFC reader, you can actually read it yourself. But with their technology, they will be able to read it much more reliably from more of a distance than you might be able to test for yourself. So they can actually read the car tire sensors. Think about that. The unique pressure in each of your tires can also be used to track you. Consider that fact. Consider that if you have 42 psi in one, you have 31 in another, and 29 in another, adding that all up, it's making a unique fingerprint of your car's tire pressure. And these sensors are easy to pick up. If you have a Hacker F and Portapack, you can check that out immediately. If you have, what do they call it? Kismet, you can read that kind of stuff with that application as well. So all of this stuff is able to be all put in one place on the centralized database. So keep that in mind. Every little transceiver, every little radio transmitter is going to be able to be fingerprinted. And that's why you should always opt for wired over wireless if you care about your privacy. So wanted to cover this kind of stuff. They talk about traffic catch, which also works with the wireless earbuds, something I talked about a solution to in our last video. So make sure to check that out. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up on what's actually happening out there. I try to give people a look ahead and offer a little bit of analysis on situations and also tutorials. So make sure to subscribe to the channel, make sure to share the channel, share the videos, help this continue into the future. It's a big help. I appreciate it. And leave a comment and like the video. So all kinds of companies are collecting all of your wireless fingerprints, all of your wireless fingerprints. Now, there are some privacy measures taken in some of these devices, but the best thing is to have it off, to have airplane mode. That is better, and a Faraday bag if you feel you need it, but most people I don't think need something like that. But I mean, obviously, if you have everything tuned correctly and you're using a safer Android operating system. But Faraday bags are definitely useful, yes, if you actually need it to be as quiet as possible. Now, there's even reporting from police officers themselves that say they didn't actually get a lot of results out of predictive policing, and that is what we can expect from this. As they mentioned, they want sentiment analysis, which is going to essentially take all of this personal data. Some of it may be working in real time, as they talk about in this DOGE master database, to surveil and track immigrants. As mentioned, this is not just immigrants. This is going to expand. Mark my words, it'll expand. And so even the police know this predictive policing is not accurate. And as well as a surveillance professor of digital surveillance at a school of law has stated that human behavior is just not as predictable as we think. Even if you get all the data, you can justify the unjustifiable just by running programs, running AIs that actually are wrong. You can actually program it or feed it bad data to be wrong, to give you the results you want. Then you can use that as a probable cause to escalate the situation, to bring them in for interrogation, to harass them, to assault them. And that is what tends to happen in certain circumstances when things are not done above board. So this is a problem. It's a major problem. They know it does wrong. They call it AI hallucinations when it's wrong. That's just a marketing ploy. They don't want to tell you it's wrong and it sucks, so they tell you that it hallucinates sometimes. Yeah, even the police, even the professors of surveillance know it's wrong. And I'm still not over my dictator phobia. F off. So, interestingly enough, an update on the telemessage story, Coinbase reveals it had over 69,000 people had their data exposed in a breach. Just May 22nd, this article came out. Coinbase refused to pay a ransom. Now, I'm not saying this is related to telemessage, but I do want to bring something up. I did find it very interesting that Coinbase was compromised shortly after the telemessage compromise showed that all of their stuff was in public record, that it was very easy They even used technology on this Israeli intelligence-connected service telemessage signal. Well, it is not necessarily directly connected to Israeli intelligence, but the people who actually founded the app, telemessage, that's used by the U.S. government to communicate at one point, and it was actually hacked within 20 minutes. Well, those people were part of, at one point in their life, Israeli intelligence community. So it's interesting that they made it so insecure. You would think somebody who worked in intelligence would be better at that security thing, to use technology from way back in the early 2000s era for creating web apps in Java. Even the person who audited it thought that their impression was the security must be poor. They used something called Ferox Buster, which actually allowed them to go through and brute force and enumerate different areas of the website. So they could find out hidden directories, things that weren't necessarily accessible as a link, but they were able to access all of the messages for all of the users. What I found was fascinating was Coinbase was part of this. Coinbase was in this. Why was Coinbase using a government application? To me, that says a lot's going on with crypto in the background. We can expect to see these freedom cities that are going to be crypto-based. We can expect to see with the administration's own cryptocurrency, they're probably going to want to capitalize on that. We can also take a look back at Peter Thiel. He actually said he met one of the people who helped make Bitcoin. Does that ever give you pause? Does that give you pause? It gives me pause, knowing his connections. Makes me start to wonder about the creation of Bitcoin. Could he have a connection to this? Well, he's definitely promoting it. He wants the freedom cities and the crypto-based communities. Definitely a way to increase the value of it. So I find that interesting that Coinbase themselves was caught up in a government-only app. So it archived the messages. Why else would Coinbase use this? There's no point in having a third party in your encrypted chats unless you have to abide by some government plan. And it sounds like there is something coming together. So that's what I got today, guys. Make sure to like, share the video, and stay up to date on these types of stories. I'll continue coming out with new tutorials. I appreciate all your guys' support. You can support this channel at bmc.link/politictech. There's a variety of options from Cash App to Bitcoin to Monero and everything in between. We also sell laptops with the back doors removed, so if you have an interest in that, we have them on the blog shop. And I'll be back later with more on how to protect your security and privacy. Leave a comment if you have one on this story. I'd love to know your feedback on it. And I'll see you guys soon in a video soon on how to protect your security and privacy.